The applause had already started before Phil Collins moved. Not the roar of a stadium, not the thunder of a Genesis crowd. This was smaller, softer, almost holy. A graduation hall full of parents, grandparents, teachers, nervous smiles, and young people standing at the edge of the rest of their lives. And somewhere in that room, his daughter was not watching a legend. She was watching her father. For most men, walking onto a school stage would be simple. For Phil, it carried a strange weight. He had spent decades stepping into lights that could blind a person. But this stage was different. There was no band behind him, no drum kit to hide behind, no orchestra to carry the moment if his voice cracked. There was only a father, a daughter, and a room full of people who suddenly understood they were about to witness something they had not expected. The public had always known Phil Collins as the man who could make a room explode with joy. He could sit behind the drums and turn pain into thunder. But behind the songs, behind the quick smile, there was another story, a quieter one. The story of a man who had often been loved by the world, while struggling to be present in the rooms that mattered most. That was the secret tension in this graduation hall. Everyone saw the famous father. Phil felt the years. He had missed things. He missed things because life on the road has a cruel way of making absence look like duty. One more concert, one more flight, one more sound check, one more hotel room. Fame does not always steal a family in one dramatic moment. Sometimes it takes a chair at a time. And now, on this day, that truth seemed to follow him down the aisle. Graduation is not just a ceremony. It is a small farewell. The child who once looked for your hand in a crowd now walks across a stage alone. The little girl who once needed help tying shoes now wears a cap and gown. A father looks at her and sees two people at once, the child she was and the woman she is becoming. Phil had written songs about love. He had sung promises to stay close. He had given the world words that fathers played for sons. But on this day, the words were no longer floating through a radio. They were sitting in his chest, heavy and personal. Before he stepped up, there was a small pause. The pause mattered more. In that pause, he was not a star preparing to perform. He was a father, measuring the distance between all the years he had given to the stage, and this one moment he could give back. The central truth of that day was simple. The smallest stage can ask more of a man than the largest crowd. Because a giant crowd only asks you to entertain them. A daughter asks you to mean it. He looked out at the faces. There was laughter first, the kind that comes when joy arrives unexpectedly. Then the hall grew quiet. The room did not become a concert venue. It became something gentler, a family memory that strangers were allowed to share. And Phil, who had once feared stepping out from behind the drums after Peter Gabriel left Genesis, found himself facing a different kind of exposure. Back then, the question had been whether he could become the singer. Now the question was simpler and harder. Could he be just a dad? For a few seconds, he seemed to carry all of it. The long flights, the broken marriages, the children growing older while calendars filled up, the ache of knowing that a career can be glorious and still leave regrets behind. The public saw a sweet surprise, but beneath it was a private repair. Not perfect, not complete. Just a father choosing, in front of everyone, to show up. And then he began. The first notes did not need to be perfect. That was the beautiful thing about the moment. A superstar had to keep the machine moving, But in that graduation hall, nobody was waiting for perfection. They were waiting for tenderness. The room softened as soon as he sang. It was not the voice of a young man chasing the next hit. It was the voice of a father who had lived long enough to understand what a song can and cannot fix. A song cannot return the missed birthdays. It cannot rewind the school plays, the ordinary breakfasts, the quiet drives. But a song can say something that ordinary speech sometimes cannot survive. It can say, "I know." It can say, "I am proud." It can say, "I may have been gone too often, but I am here now." And that was why the moment worked. It was not a celebrity stunt. It was not a polished television performance. It felt a little fragile. It felt exposed. The kind of moment where the room understands that joy and regret are not enemies. They often sit side by side, especially in families. Phil had built his life around rhythm. Even before he became the frontman of Genesis, before the solo career, rhythm was his refuge. Behind the drums, he could control the storm. He knew where the crash would come. He knew when the silence would hit. He knew how to hold a band together. But fatherhood does not follow a drummer's count. Children do not grow according to a tour schedule. They need you on ordinary days, not only on the days you can arrange to be sentimental. They remember presence. They remember absence. And sometimes, years later, a father stands on a school stage and realizes that applause is not the same as forgiveness, but it may be the beginning of something softer. What the audience saw was happiness. What the song carried was history. There was a time when Phil seemed able to do everything at once. Genesis albums, solo records, tours that crossed oceans. He became one of those rare musicians whose voice was everywhere. For millions of people, his songs were part of family life. But the irony was painful. The more his music entered other people's homes, the more difficult it became for him to stay inside his own. That is the wound that made the graduation performance feel so moving. The crowd was not just cheering a famous man. They were watching a father try to make a public gesture for a private bond. And maybe his daughter smiled. Maybe she felt embarrassed in that loving way children do when parents make a ceremony suddenly personal. It is one thing to know your father is famous, and another thing to feel him singing directly into the story of your life. The hall was full of people who had their own stories. Older parents who knew the ache of letting children go. Grandparents who had seen how quickly a baby's hand becomes an adult's wave from across a room. That is why the moment spread through the room so quickly. It belonged to Phil and his daughter, but it also belonged to everyone who had ever wished for one more chance to be fully present. And as he sang, the old public image of Phil Collins began to change inside that room. He was not the cheeky hitmaker, not the tireless drummer. He was older now, more vulnerable. A man whose body had paid for the music. A man whose hands, once so powerful behind the drum kit, had known pain and weakness. That made the gesture even more human. He was not performing because he needed attention. He was performing because some moments deserve the strength you have left. The daughter on graduation day does not need her father to be young. She does not need him to be flawless. She does not need him to erase the past. She needs him to stand where he can be seen and say, without defense, "This matters to me." That was the turning point of the story. Not the applause, not the surprise. The turning point was the look of a man who understood that life had brought him to a stage where success meant something smaller and deeper than fame. For decades, the world had asked Phil Collins to give them feeling. On this day, feeling asked something back from him. It asked him to be present without hiding behind the legend. It asked him to let the room see the father beneath the famous name. It asked him to turn a school ceremony into a quiet promise. And somehow, in that fragile space between a public performance and a private apology, the hall began to feel less like a graduation and more like a homecoming. Because the smallest stage can ask more of a man than the largest crowd, and Phil seemed to know it now. When the song ended, the room did not simply applaud, it exhaled. There is a difference. Applause celebrates what happened. An exhale releases what everyone had been holding. For a few minutes, a graduation ceremony had become something older and more universal than caps, gowns, and speeches. It became a reminder that even famous families carry ordinary longings. A daughter wants to feel chosen. A father wants one more chance to show up before the years close a door. Phil smiled, and maybe that smile carried relief. Not the relief of a performer who had finished a song, but the relief of a father who had made it through an emotional moment without turning away from it. He had spent so much of his life converting pain into music that people sometimes forgot the pain had to exist first. The songs came from somewhere. The tenderness came from somewhere. The ache in his voice was never just a sound. It was evidence. That is why this story stayed with people. Not because a celebrity appeared at a graduation. This was different because it touched a deeper nerve. It showed a man whose greatest public gift had always been emotional honesty, trying to offer that same honesty to his own child in a room that was not built for fame. The public legacy of Phil Collins is full of enormous moments. The transition from the back of the stage to the front, the concerts where thousands sang every word, the songs that moved from heartbreak to healing. But legacy is not only built in arenas. Sometimes it is built in a school hall, under soft lights, while a father sings and a daughter realizes that for once, the whole room is not taking him away from her. The whole room is giving him back. That is the emotional truth people felt, even if they could not name it. For years, Phil's music had helped other families say things they struggled to say. People borrowed his voice for their own memories. They used his melodies to hold grief, affection, regret, and hope. And now, in a graduation hall, the circle quietly turned. The man whose voice had belonged to everyone used it for one person. That is a powerful thing. It does not make him perfect. It does not turn the past into a clean story. It does not erase the marriages, the distance, the pressures, the choices, or the cost of ambition. The beauty of the moment is that it does not need to erase anything. It is moving because it stands beside all of it. A late gesture can still be real. A flawed father can still love deeply. A song can arrive after years of silence and still find the right room. Perhaps that is why older viewers understand stories like this so well. By a certain age, everyone knows that life rarely gives us perfect timing. We finally see what mattered after spending years chasing what seemed urgent. And sometimes If grace is kind, we get one small stage, one open microphone, one chance to say what should have been said a long time ago. For Phil Collins, that graduation stage was not Wembley. It was smaller than all of that. And because it was smaller, it was somehow larger. A stadium can prove that the world loves you. A graduation hall can reveal whether the people closest to you still feel your love. That is the part that lingers. The image of Phil standing there, older, tender, exposed, singing not to impress but to bless. The image of a daughter at the edge of her future, hearing a voice the world had claimed, returned to her as a father's gift. The image of strangers smiling because they understood the real performance was not musical. It was emotional courage. In the end, maybe that is what Phil Collins survived. Not only fame. He survived the strange loneliness of being known by millions while still needing to be known at home. And on that day, for one brief song, home and stage became the same place. The smallest stage can ask more of a man than the largest crowd. And this time, Phil Collins answered as a father. If stories like this remind you why this music still matters, subscribe for more untold stories from the legends who gave everything to the music.